Now coming to the stage, Dr. Jonathan Cox, Vice President of the Center for Policy Analysis and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, so again, my name is Dr. Jonathan Cox, and I am our Vice President for the Center for Policy Analysis and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. It's a great privilege to welcome each and every one of you to this session and to the 53rd Annual Legislative Conference of the CBCF. So every September each year, we host this vital platform to tackle the challenges and explore opportunities for Black Americans and the global Black community. Now, as the nation's largest public policy conference dedicated to Black communities, ALC is a hub of innovation, strategic thought, and more importantly, impactful action. This year's theme, From Vision to Victory, Amplifying Black Voices, underscores the urgency of centering and uplifting Black voices. History teaches us that when Black Americans thrive, all of America prospers, whether that's through economic empowerment, safeguarding civil rights, and upholding the principles of democracy. Now, as we conclude this pivotal election year, turning our vision into victory really hinges on amplifying all of our unified Black voices. Now, at the Center for Policy Analysis and Research, we are dedicated to the CBCF's mission of informing policy and educating the public. We're committed to driving change by producing timely research and policy recommendations on issues that are critical to Black communities. Now, today's session is a reflection of that commitment. Shortly, you will hear from influential leaders, practitioners, and change agents who are shaping policy and pushing forward action that impacts both individuals and institutions. Now, we deeply appreciate their contributions and continued efforts on behalf of our communities. I also wanted to take this opportunity to thank our session sponsor, State Farm. Now, we appreciate State Farm not only for their sponsorship of this session, but their ongoing partnership with us to address issues of transportation equity. Now, your dedication and support demonstrate your commitment to changing the lives of Black people across our nation, and so we are so grateful. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you one of our sponsors, Natalie Brunson-Wheeler. Natalie Brunson-Wheeler is a member of State Farm's Law Department in Bloomington, Illinois, where she serves as Legislative and Regulatory Counsel for Louisiana, Missouri, and Mississippi. In this role, she monitors and directs State Farm's legislative and regulatory responses on insurance and business-related issues. As a native of New Orleans, Louisiana, Natalie received her bachelor's degree from Indiana State University and her law degree from Vanderbilt School of Law. She is an active life member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And, I don't know if there are any other AKs in here. Y'all having a great moment right now, so live it up. She is also a life associate member of Jack and Jill of America Incorporated, and proudly a member of the board of directors for the CBCF. So please join me in welcoming Natalie Brunson-Wheeler to the stage.
Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by commending Congressional Black Caucus Foundation CEO, President Nicole Austin Hillary, CBCF leadership, and staff in organizing this amazing conference. On behalf of more than 19,000 agents and over 67,000 employees, State Farm is privileged to partner with the foundation in inspiring leaders through scholarship support, policy research, and our longtime investment in the communication internship program. We are extremely excited to sponsor this critical panel discussion, Mobilizing Equity, Advancing Sustainable Transportation in Black Communities. State Farm has a long-standing commitment to building safer and robust communities, so it's no surprise that we support platforms like this session. We know we are stronger and better when we seek the broadest perspectives, invite fresh new ideas, and encourage healthy, respectful dialogue. These beliefs are core to our organization and are reflected in all aspects of our business. At State Farm, we're committed to successful D&I strategies, and we understand that transportation equity is an important component to this mission. Investment in active transportation often leads to improved infrastructure, like better sidewalks, bike lanes, and pedestrian crossings. These improvements can make the neighborhoods where we work, live, and do business safer and more accessible, thereby helping to address some of the inequities facing many of our communities. At State Farm, we're committed to fostering connections in as many diverse communities as we can, and we hope that you see this commitment as we continually strive to help our communities when you need us most. I'd like to thank the members of this esteemed panel for contributing their time and expertise to this important topic. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Natalie. And now it is my distinct honor to introduce our moderator for today's session, Dr. Celeste Chavis. Dr. Chavis is a professor and chair in the Department of Transportation and Urban Infrastructure Studies at Morgan State University, where she leads the School of Engineering and Structural Technology and ABET program accreditation efforts. Since joining Morgan State, Dr. Chavis has been the principal or co-principal investigator for research projects totaling over $20 million. Her research focuses on the planning, operations, and safety of multimodal transportation systems with an emphasis on transportation equity. She actively participates in her professional community, serving as vice chair of the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance Executive Board and on the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Celeste Chavis to the stage.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm looking for the bios that are here. Okay, I am a prepared moderator, so. So we have a wonderful panel today, and I'm gonna briefly introduce each of them as quickly as possible to save as much time for the discussion. So the first person is Ms. Sally Ayok. She is a Transportation Equity Senior Research Fellow for Policy Analysis and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. She works directly with CBCF to produce policy analysis and research pertaining to transportation sustainability and equity, as well as to analyze best practices and policy solutions for the promotion and integration of comprehensive efforts that have the most significant impact on Black communities. She is currently pursuing a PhD in urban planning and public policy at the University of Texas, Arlington. Ms. Sally Ayuk. Our second panelist is Ms. Shayna Baker. She is the Deputy Associate Administrator of the Office of Policy and External Affairs with the Federal Highway Administration. As the Deputy Associate Administrator, Shayna supervises and coordinates the activities of staff responsible for a variety of critical and diverse topics ranging from the managing congressional affairs, housing FHWA's traffic and transportation performance data, collaborating with the international community on new highway technology, transportation research and program innovations, and performing studies and analyses of national transportation policy options. She previously served as a director of Office of Corporate Research, Technology, and Innovation Management at Turner Fairbanks, and was the Associate Administrator for Highway Policy and External Affairs. Ms. Baker. Next, we have Mr. Charles T. Brown. He is the founder and principal of Equitable Cities, a minority and veteran-owned urban planning, public policy, and research firm focused on the intersection of transportation, health, and equity. He's also been an adjunct professor at the Edward Blumenstein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University. Charles is an award-winning expert in planning and policy and is highly regarded as a keynote speaker. In addition, Charles is a military veteran and a recipient of the MS Commendation Medal. Charles Brown. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Monica Garrison, the founder and executive director of Black Girls Do Bike Incorporated. She believes that the simple act of riding a bike can catalyze wonderful and empowering experiences for women of all ages. After a summer of rediscovering her affection for cycling and using it to manage her mental and physical health, she noticed few women of color riding in her hometown. She set out to find other women with a passion for riding bikes. What started as a simple idea to connect local lady cyclists has grown into a movement with more than 100 inclusive riding groups and 190 lady leaders. Ms. Garrison. So I'm gonna sit and join the panel. So the way the session will work is I'll start by asking the panelists some questions, and then hopefully we'll save some time so that you guys can also join in and ask this esteemed group some questions. For the audience Q&A, we'll put up a QR code for you to put your questions in, and then they'll be read off accordingly. So let's get started. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act represents a significant amount of new funding towards much needed infrastructure and job competitiveness. I would like to kick this session off by asking how policymakers can ensure that funds from this bipartisan bill are equitably distributed to prioritize the development of safe and accessible transportation facilities in Black communities that have historically been underserved. Maybe Shayna, if you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. So I believe that policymakers need to have a general awareness of what's out there. This landmark amount, it's $350 billion. This is an investment of a generation. It's not every day that we have transportation bills of that amount. And in addition to that, this transportation bill is historic because there are specific programs and policies that speak to equity. So I honestly believe that policymakers need to become aware of what's out there, have an understanding of what is Justice 40. Justice 40 is an initiative from the Biden and Harris administration that ensures that at least 40% of the programs and grants that we have will make a difference in disadvantaged communities. FHWA has 17 programs that fall under our Justice 40 program. Policymakers need to have an understanding of what are the programs, what are the resources, who's eligible to apply. And I'm happy to say, and I have to toot the agency's own horn, that we have lots of resources. We have a bill website. We have an IRA website. The Inflation Reduction Act also has programs pertaining to equity. Those websites not only let you know about the NOFO availability, but those websites will have webinars that have been taped, have Q&As, FAQs as well about these programs. So I really believe that policymakers have a responsibility to understand what is in EJA, how can it impact and transform my community.
Mic check. For the record, my bio should have said life member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated.
I apologize.
Let's never leave that out. There you go. So I think you asked a very important question, and I think in that question we have to emphasize the importance of equitable distribution. Firstly, I think the Biden-Harris administration has put together the most impressive DOT in the history of this country. I want that to be acknowledged firstly. But secondly, when you're talking about equitably distributing something, that calls for a need to distribute based on need. And the need in our community is beyond the 40% that has been minimally stated. When you're looking to distribute things equitably and you're looking at needs, that means that it's a data-driven process. And I think when you look at the data shows that the need in Black and brown communities is far more than 40%. So how do you do it equitably? You commit the funding to where people need it most. And currently, again, that percentage is much higher than 40%. So if we want to get closer to an equitable distribution, we give the money to the Black and brown community based on their need, not based upon a target that doesn't accurately reflect the need as it currently stands.
Thank you for that. I know often when we talk about equity, it's talking about people coming into our communities to provide necessary resources. But I think it's also important for us to recognize that the communities need to be part of this process. Often we see that communities most in need of investment, particularly when they're racialized, minoritized groups, they're left out of planning and decision-making processes for their own neighborhoods. So what needs to happen to make sure that Black and brown organizations, community leaders, residents have ownership in the planning process? And actually, maybe Monica, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think as someone who is building community, what you'll find is a lot of people on the grassroots level are already doing these things, and they just lack either resources or just knowledge of where to go and to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So I think what's probably most important is to build trust with the community before you start to attempt to make changes, and also to trust the community that they know what's best for them. And if you have that open line of communication, that's a great place to start.
Absolutely. Charles, what have you seen in your work?
As it relates to ownership, I think we have misrepresentation in terms of leadership. Our communities would not have a difficult time connecting or being involved if the leadership reflected that community. I also think there are cultural differences and different requirements in terms of how we live, in terms of when we plan meetings, where we conduct meetings, whether or not we're compensated for our time, and so on and so forth. So I think we can improve the processes simply by hiring Black firms like Equitable Cities to lead these processes, because we've never had a problem connecting with our people.
Excellent point. Yes.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We need meaningful public involvement and engagement. And by meaningful, what I mean is you are proactively going out to seek input and to find ways to address that input as well. FHWA has developed two actually guides that I wanted to share that really speaks to this. One guide, it really targets people that don't understand the transportation planning process. That gets you the seat at the table. That helps you give input to have an understanding of how the state DOTs, as well as the metropolitan planning organizations, how do they prioritize their projects? How are they going out and they are seeking input? You have to have that seat at the table. So one guide that we developed is called Promising Practices for Meaningful Public Involvement in Transportation Decision Making. And I wanted to take my time to get this right, is because there are techniques in this book that talks about meaningful public involvement. It is written in a way that anyone can understand it. It is plain English that it shows people, and it defines all of our acronyms that we use in the transportation world. It gives you practical information about how to make a difference. It's an excellent guide. There's also a section in there about equity as well. How do you let your voice be heard? And so I personally feel like it's a good how-to guide for someone that needs to have an understanding of how do I get that seat at the table. The second guide that I wanted to mention that I think is a very practical guide as well. It's more for the practitioners, but it's open to the public. It's techniques. No, that's the wrong guide. The first guide is called the Transportation Decision Making Guide for Getting Involved. That's the practical guide that lets any citizen understand how do you get involved in the process. The second guide is Promising Practices for Meaningful Public Involvement in Transportation Decision Making. This is the one that gives MPOs and state DOTs information on how do you actually measure the success of public involvement strategies. And I highlight that because you can say you're doing public involvement and you can say, I'm doing a great job, but really, how are you measuring it? How many people are coming out? Who's being engaged? Are you following up with people that are giving input as well? And so we have developed some guides to help people gain that seat at the table and to make sure that that public involvement process is meaningful.
That's a great point. Anyone have anything to add, Sally?
I will add that in addition to the government getting those guides out and everything, the government also needs to communicate directly with the community, because most people don't understand like what they are looking for. They come with surveys, they are asking questions. People need to understand what is behind the surveys, what they're trying to get. You bring a survey and you ask somebody like, what do you want? You need to meet the community and understand the community before you bring in the survey. So there has to be a formal guide or a formal way of including the Black communities before the policies are done, not including them after the policies are done, then asking them, what do you need from these policies that we've created?
The one piece that I want to add, and that is so accurate and so true, and I can speak to the planning process because by nature, I'm a planner. By training, I'm a planner. So in the transportation planning process, there is specific requirements that require the state DOT and the MPO to reach out to the traditionally underserved. They have to have a process that outlines what are you doing to go out to those communities. And it's been a while since I've been actually in the field and actually doing this. But when I was a planner, I worked in our Florida division office. And I can remember in the Tampa area how they would go out to the community. They wouldn't expect the community to come to them, but they would go out to the community to engage people. They were very mindful of what time are you holding these community meetings? Why are you holding a community meeting or a meeting at 2 p.m. and you want input? And most of us, including myself, at 2 p.m., I'm at work. You know, it's requiring people to go above and beyond. And I can honestly say that those regulations speak to that. And having been a planner on the side, as reviewing what the state and the DOT does, we definitely hold them to that, to say, what are you actually doing to go out to reach the traditionally underserved?
So I want to make sure that we're highlighting active transportation. We know we have lots of transportation needs in general, but maybe can you guys speak a little bit about how you see this $350 billion investment in infrastructure funding being utilized to enhance active transportation, such as biking and walking, and promote equitable mobility choices in Black communities, and especially considering that we know that the Biden-Harris administration has a very strong push towards moving towards cleaner energy sources. Shayna, if you want to start.
Sure. I see that this money can help shape and reshape the way our communities are looking by providing access to jobs and essential services, and yes, through active transportation, because that's a critical connection that sometimes are often overlooked, that everybody doesn't have a car, that we need to ensure that our communities have sidewalks. We need to ensure that there are bicycle facilities, separated bike lanes in our communities. And so I believe that this bill, that these programs can really help reshape in some instances and shape the way that our communities are being planned by ensuring that we have multimodal transportation options, and bicycle and pedestrian facilities are an option. And for some communities, a bicycle is a primary mode of transportation, like my car is for me. And so I don't think that we need to neglect the population that uses a bicycle as their primary mode of transportation. We have to make sure that we are incorporating these types of facilities in our communities. And again, many programs under EJA, we call it internally the bipartisan infrastructure law, gives those opportunities where we are encouraging and money can be used to build bicycle facilities, to build pedestrian facilities as well.
Great. Anyone have anything to add on that?
I think I'll add, I feel like the law was passed in 2021. Now is the midpoint. So I'm calling on DOT to go back and review, because everything was drawn under Justice 40 boundaries, to go back and review like all the projects that have been done on each of the boundaries, see what boundaries are being neglected, and maybe reprioritize what they want to do for the next until 2026.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of cycling. I'm a cyclist. I spent my entire career advancing equitable access to cycling. And I also think cycling of all the modes is by far the sexiest. So I'm really a fan of cycling. But it's not as popular as it can be in the Black community, not because there isn't a desire to cycle, but even when we have perceived access, and perceived access is sort of illuminated as proximity to these things, we are still disproportionately policed in a way that makes it a barrier to cycling. That is one of the reasons why I've advanced this discussion around a diagnosis I deem arrested mobility. I believe Black and brown communities' mobility has been arrested, whether we're talking about the planning of these facilities, the policing of it, and the polity that's created around it, meaning the culture of over policing. So it's not just enough to put the infrastructure in the ground. If we have a siloed conversation about where it's located and not how it's policed as a result of where it's located, then we're still falling short.
Absolutely. And Monica, through your organization, what have you found in terms of maybe arrested mobility, particularly as it relates to women cyclists?
Yeah, I think when you look at the barriers to entry to cycling, for instance, and other outdoor activities, that's kind of the first line of defense, right? It's do I feel comfortable on this bicycle in this traffic, or are there bike lanes near my home that can give me access to work or school? My North Star is always, can my kids safely ride to school on a bicycle or walk to school? And until that happens, right, until all of us are free, none of us are free. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of things that stand in the way. There are things specific to Black women and Black people, and the policymakers, decision makers need to incorporate those things, and everything needs to be looked through this equity lens.
Thank you. So I think, Sally, I'm gonna turn to you as a CBCFO. I know you spent a lot of time researching this issue. So from your research, how can the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act be leveraged to specifically address disparities in active transportation access in Black communities?
Yeah, I think when I looked into a lot of Black communities, they are always missing like sidewalks, signs, even like the proximity of crossings. If you have a long road without any safe part of crossing, I'm more likely to cross in the middle of the road. I think that leads to what he was saying about like the arrested mobility. So then you get arrested for jaywalking. So we don't just need to do like sidewalks. We need to also repair broken sidewalks. We need to put trails in the Black community. We also need to make sure that the light system, the crossing, is both for visually and non-visually impaired people. Because sometimes when we are putting out the lights, we feel like everybody can cross, but some people might not. Some people use wheelchair. Sidewalks has to be wide enough to incorporate everything. And when I check on the DOT website, and I spoke to several people on the DOT, I think the US is one of the countries with no database that is free and easily accessible and exhaustive of sidewalks or active mobility connectivity. So I feel like the DOT needs to use part of this money that they have, which is a lot of billions, to create a sidewalk connectivity that can be used for research. Because if you don't know where the problem is, you cannot solve it. I think good data leads to good policy.
Absolutely. And I think just in general, we see that, particularly when it comes to safety data, bicyclists and pedestrians are traditionally very underreported. And we also know that Black communities have a higher level of exposure and have more risk. So it's very, very important topics that you raised. So let's try to see where I want the conversation to go. Let's talk about strategies to promote the benefits of active transportation, right? I think all of us on here are strong promoters of active transportation, but what specific strategies can be used to promote the benefits of active mobility among Black Americans to increase adoption? And I think I'm going to start with you, Monica.
Yeah, I think strategies. I'm like Liam Neeson in Taken. I have a very particular set of skills, which is getting Black women on bikes. So whether it be addressing helmet sizes and natural hair, or there's so there's so many. Like I said, being a brown body on a bicycle around cars that could take you out at any second because you don't know who's behind the wheel and what their intentions are. Lots of things. And so, in terms of getting people on bicycles, it's always been we almost have to survey at the outset, like what is keeping you from getting on the bike? Did you never learn to ride when you were a young child, which is a big thing. And then ultimately, having the community is what builds the community. So if you're showing up on a regular basis and there are people there holding you accountable, and there are people who have been through, right? So you have beginner riders, you have advanced riders, and everyone's kind of working together, and iron sharpens iron. So it's like you learn from the people next to you, right? And as that continues, the each one teach one philosophy works really well. So one is showing up, one is having the community there to support people when they do show up, consistency, and also meeting people where they are, whether that be financially or physically. So all rides don't have to be 20 miles. You could do a 1 to 3 mile ride to get to entice beginners. So there are a lot of strategies to get butts on seats, as we say.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay, so let's talk about making sure that we're not leaving out the rural community in this conversation. I think often we think of cities. Excellent. We think of transportation. Often we think of cities and urban transportation, but we know Black communities are in cities and suburbs and rural communities. So how can we ensure that this funding is used to, address the intersection of racial equity and active transportation initiatives to shape the future of mobility justice in both urban, rural, and in between areas? Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, well, I'm from a town of 350 people in rural Mississippi called Sugar Lock, so I think I'm qualified to start. Um, what we have to do is, unfortunately, when we discuss rural in this context, oftentimes it becomes synonymous with whiteness in the same way that urbanity becomes synonymous with blackness. So I think we need to kind of take that description back. And by doing that, we could focus on the needs of our community in the rural context, which differ a whole lot from our white counterparts in that context. And what it means is that, like, we grow up, many of us, without access to cars. So by advancing a trail network, by promoting cycling from a more positive context, by removing highways such as the Reconnecting Communities Project has done, from bifurcating our communities, making it safer to bike to and from. And also, a lot of the modes that we're promoting are promoted through the lens of a 9 to 5 p.m. commute. It's very worker centric. We know many of our peers are working, non-traditional hours, so we need to ensure that it's safe not to bike and walk during the day, but also during the night as well. And so, what we need to do, because we all know, whether you live in a city or not, many of your cousins are from those rural environments, that as Black people, we don't forget them and we continue to advocate for them to make things better. So, I think continuing to raise the awareness around what they're suffering is a great start.
Great. So as you see, the QR code is now on the screen. We definitely want to make sure that we have time for lots of questions from the audience. As you all are getting your questions in, I think I'll ask the panelists one more question, and then I'll turn it over to audience questions. This discussion has, of course, been centered around the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is federal. But how can this funding also be used to support state and local efforts towards active transportation projects? Maybe Shayna, we'll start with you.
Yeah, a lot of the money is available for state departments of transportation as well as, and this is new for Bill, there are some non-traditional stakeholders that we typically don't provide grants to. Bill has opened the playing field to allow them to be able to apply for grants. Cities can apply for certain grants. And so I think it's opened up the door where it's not just state DOTs. One example of this type of program is the Safe Streets and Roads for All. State DOTs aren't eligible to apply for that grant. They can work with the communities to apply for that grant, and that grant provides money to be able to build bicycle pedestrian facilities, and it's looking at reducing fatalities on the roadways as well. And when I say roadways, I'm not just talking about the highway, I'm talking about on streets as well. And that's a good example of a program that's associated with Bill, where it's not just for the state DOTs, but yes, state DOTs get the majority of our formula program. We provide our money to the state DOTs. We say that our program is federally funded, but the states are the ones that pick the projects. And I know this is about active transportation, but in addition to active transportation, it has to be about people having an understanding of awareness of how do I get access to that money. You have to have a seat at the table and understand the process in order to bring about change and to influence the decisions that are being made, because it's being made at a local level. The federal government does not come in and tell a state and say, you shall plan a bicycle pedestrian facility here. We give you the states the money to do that. And we also strongly encourage that they look at the entire transportation system, and we've developed tools to be able to look and to do look at maps to be able to see how are these projects that you're proposing, how are they going to impact disadvantaged communities. There's a tool, I think it's called STEEP, that we have that's available, where you can plug in some potential project information, and it pulls up layers of information about demographics of communities where it can impact people and how is that project impacting folks. So I hope I answered that.
You did indeed. So I guess I'll turn it over.
I want to chime in briefly on that.
Sure.
And this may offend my political connects, as Hove once said. But there lies the problem. The fact that these states have so much control over federal money. And when we look across the country, you would be hard pressed to find a state that advocates strongly for, encourages strongly for active transportation. So I think the states are the issue. I would rather see the money go to the cities that know how to do this and do this well. So until we fix that problem, I think we're always going to be having this discussion around how can we get states, because states simply aren't willing.
Excellent point. I think active transportation in general is a very localized problem, and so it needs localized expertise as well, including the community groups who are living in those communities. So with that, I will turn it over to CBCF staff to ask some of the questions that the audience has posed, and then I'll save some time for some closing remarks from our panelists to wrap us up.
Absolutely, thank you. This question says, I live in a city where there is a lot of pushback about bike lanes in Black communities. They are seen as a sign of gentrification and removing parking spots that patrons of small businesses shop at in Black neighborhoods. What do you suggest to turn the tide towards cycling in Black neighborhoods instead of it being seen as a sign of white people's activity or a sign of gentrification?
Monica, Charles.
Yeah. So one of the foremost experts on that topic. First of all, that is a valid complaint. Um, I think it's misinformed. I don't think it's true that Black communities don't want bicycle facilities. They just don't want it to be when white people enter into their community, because they've been advocating for access for a long time. So if you only see this investment come with whiteness, then you too may think that it's only tied to whiteness, but that isn't true. What is true is that our communities have simply been ignored. And when whiteness does enter into an environment, they demand certain things of government and they get it. So I don't want to focus on there not being in alignment with black people on bikes. The alignment or the misalignment is the fact that we can't get what we ask for. And so what we need to do is demand more, organize more, and be more proactive. Because cycling isn't the problem. Cycling combined with whiteness is, especially in the context of anti-displacement and gentrification.
Next question.
The next question was just a prompt to talk about how emerging transportation technologies can help disadvantaged communities, both urban and rural.
Excellent question. So maybe Sally, as our researcher, let you kick us off.
I think there are so many emerging trends, especially when we look at like different pilot programs that like Uber, Lyft, Lime, they are launching. Most of the time we find that those pilot programs are not like launched in the black neighborhoods. So that's why they fail. So when we start launching all of those programs in the black neighborhoods, giving out bikes for the black folks to use for like 6 months for free to go to the market, to go to their jobs and back, they tend to trust that system, and with that they can extend the pilot program. But when they don't have it and they don't test it or they get the benefits of it, any technology that we use, whether it's bike, giving out bike for free, using electric bikes, or just creating the sidewalks, it's not going to last.
Well, I did research that shows that the Washington Metro bike share system is one of the most equitable systems in the country. I think that's important to recognize. The ones that were not equitable were the ones who were targeting tourists as opposed to people who live there. So those are systems that are being placed outside of the black community. And I think too, we have a conversation about transportation in silo too much. The whole purpose of transportation is a destination, origin and destination. So how likely are you to bike somewhere or walk somewhere or use an e-scooter when the thing you're looking for is not even in your community? That is why we have to have a conversation around transportation along with land use and housing and destinations that are nearby, not far away.
Absolutely. And I think, oftentimes because these emerging technologies are operated by private companies, often communities want to entice them, but communities have power. And, you can require, that there's a certain percentage placed in certain communities because they want to come to your community. And I think just knowing that for like state and local officials, right, you can mandate certain things through the contracting process to ensure that all communities are being served with these emerging technologies. Do we have any more audience questions?
We do. This question is on a little bit of a wider scale. The question is, how can we leverage global sporting events such as the 2026 FIFA World Cup and the 2028 LA Olympics to encourage legacy projects in public transportation?
Excellent question.
It's a big one.
Anybody want to take that one?
While also preventing gentrification and displacement at the same time. We know the Olympics are coming. Just like if you're a Game of Thrones fan, winter's coming. Unfortunately, in our community, winter is always coming. What is not happening is a proactive strategy to take advantage of the Olympics coming. And so I think we have enough brain power in this meeting of the minds to now, I don't want to say volunteer because we do too much volunteering, but do something to help our communities to create a strategy that helps them benefit from this, not just be burdened by it. But that in itself is a workshop topic.
Absolutely. I think we have time for probably one more audience question at least.
We have a couple of questions about pathways to entrepreneur or ways that the new. I'll just read the question. The first question is, how do we make sure that there are pathways for Black entrepreneurs to be a part of the new transportation technologies? And the second question is, Self-driving technology and flying cars are no longer a distant reality. How can we prepare minority research institutions and areas to be at the cutting edge of these emerging technologies?
So entrepreneur, I think I'm gonna start with Charles as a business owner. We'll let you kick us off.
Yeah, until you're on your own, you can't be free. Um, but it's very difficult, I must say, being a black male, a CEO of an urban planning public policy firm, oftentimes because we're looked at as the quote unquote field Negroes, meaning we're asked to do the outreach and the engagement, not do the design, the policy work, and so on and so forth. Um, but you have to fight back against that while still doing the engagement to pay the bills. You have to fight back against that. I want to throw the challenge back to you. One of the most difficult things I've had is actually hiring black people. What is it about our black people that go into government, that go work for larger white companies, but won't bring your best talents to me? Am I not a capable leader? So the thing is that I'm not one that feels like I'm a victim. I'm ready to work towards the solutions that I want to see in my community. It's just that when I look around, I don't see many people standing next to me. Because this profession, the entrepreneurship, is not a guaranteed paycheck. And I understand the need to have a guaranteed paycheck, but just know nothing is really guaranteed. So take a risk, get out on your own, and there will be some amazing people who are going to help you from start to finish. And just know that you can. I think that's the main takeaway. Um, because at the end, what do you have to lose?
Yeah, and I would say from an educator standpoint, as someone who runs a transportation department at a historically black college and university, we face many of the same barriers, right? They want to bring us on board if it's a project related to equity, if they want to go into a black and brown community to be the public facing person. They want us to bring us in as subs with very little funding. And so from a research standpoint, addressing that second question, it's really bringing us on as leads and as prime and allowing HBCUs to take ownership of projects and other minority serving institutions. And I think one of the challenges in academia in particular, me and Charles were talking because our Transportation Research Board, which is the academic conference for transportation, is in this same space. And it looks absolutely nothing like this room. So we were both like, wow, this is almost like a weird deja vu. We're in the same place that we often reconvene every year, but it looks completely different. And so I'm personally passionate about bringing in more people who look like this into the transportation profession and then ensuring that those research dollars are coming back to HBCUs and particularly thinking about how to leverage those dollars to impact our domestic students, because we do know that at the doctoral level, it's a lot of international students who are supporting that across the country, regardless of the size of the institution. And so thinking about how those dollars can be leveraged to support undergraduate students and domestic students as well. So I think we are nearing our time, but I want to give the panelists each a moment to give any closing remarks, whether it be amplifying the work that your organizations are doing to increase access to active transportation, any words that you would like to leave our audience who will be going out and doing some of this work. And then we'll of course, continue this conversation because an hour is not enough to talk about active transportation. So I'll just work from far end down.
Yeah, I think one thing I want the audience to leave this room is like when we are talking about active transportation, I want us to also look at equity, but also environmental justice. So every time we are talking about it, we have to put the two together because they go hand in hand.
So I want to leave with a personal note. We started this work, and when I say we, as the Department of Transportation under the Obama administration, we started this work called Ladders of Opportunity, if anybody remembers. So we started this work and we talked about the tough stuff. We talked about how infrastructure destroyed communities, and they were communities of color. And I can personally say I was impacted by it, not because I lived in a community, but the church that I attended was in one of those communities. And I remember at that time, we didn't have any money. When I say we, the federal government did not have any money to be able to give to anyone, state DOTs or anyone, to say, look at ways, how can we right the wrongs of our past? And here we sit in 2024, we have a way to go. I'm not saying we have made it to the promised land, not at all. But we have programs now that can address those types of issues in communities. And I think about the community that I was impacted by being a little girl, going to church in West Baltimore. And I always looked out the window and said, where do these kids play? Why is it just concrete? Why is there a road? And if anybody's from Baltimore, it's in West Baltimore, and it's called the Highway to Nowhere. And I'm happy to report that they received a $2 billion, I do believe. I know they received a grant to help transform that community. So as I reflect on the eras of the past of how transportation infrastructure destroyed communities, I look at how this bill has provided money to help rebuild communities, and it does include bicycle and pedestrian facilities. So it gives us this opportunity to reshape our communities. It gives the government an opportunity in our own way to right the wrongs of our past. And I can say I'm happy to be a part of that, and I'm happy to see the changes that can be done with the money associated with EJA.
I would say ownership, ownership, ownership. Number one. Number two, I think it's imperative that we remember that politics are local. Join your local planning board. I serve as the vice chair on my planning board, and trust me, that makes a huge difference. People know that there's at least one advocate for the Black and Brown communities on that on that planning board, which gives you a unique set of powers within reason. Thirdly, continue to hire Black. Of course, we don't want to discriminate in any hiring practices, but we need opportunities. And lastly, as Dr. King once said, don't forget that our lives do begin to end the moment we become silent about things that matter. If you have nothing, you have your voice. Speak up, speak often, and never give up.
So I will take the opportunity to plug Black Girls Do Bike a little bit. We have over 100 chapters across the U.S. We even have international chapters now, and over 190 lady leaders. And I say this because we're in almost every major city in the U.S. We are boots on the ground. We're connected to bike shops and bike ped organizations who are doing this work to put bike lanes in and things like that. So we have a really robust, interconnected community of women who are titans in their own right. So reach out, tap into that, ride with us. And I think most people in this room would agree that mobility is a right, and that's what we're fighting for.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Please continue this conversation after this session. I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for providing space for this important topic. And thank you to State Farm for sponsoring this event. And please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.